This is a continuation of The Gods of Mars by Edgar Burroughs, comprising chapters 17 through 19. Chapter 17. The Death Sentence. A few moments before the appointed time on the following morning, a strong guard of Zat Arras officers appeared at our quarters to conduct us to the great hall of the temple. In twos we entered the chamber and marched down the broad aisle of hope, as it is called, to the platform in the center of the hall. Before and behind us marched armed guards, while three solid ranks of Zodangan soldiery lined either side of the aisle from the entrance to the rostrum. As we reached the raised enclosure, I saw our judges. As is the custom upon Barsoom, there were 31, supposedly selected by lot from men of the noble class, for nobles were on trial. But to my amazement, I saw no single friendly face among them. Practically all were Zodangans, and it was I to whom Zodanga owed her defeat at the hands of the Green Hordes, and her subsequent vassalage to Helium. There could be little justice here for John Carter or his son, or for the great Thark who had commanded the savage tribesmen who overran Zodanga's broad avenues, looting, burning, and murdering. About us, the vast circular coliseum was packed to its full capacity. All classes were represented, all ages and both sexes. As we entered the hall, the hum of subdued conversation ceased until, as we halted upon the platform, or throne of righteousness, the silence of death enveloped the 10,000 spectators. The judges were seated in a great circle about the periphery of the circular platform. We were assigned seats with our backs toward a small platform in the exact center of the larger one. This placed us facing the judges in the audience. Upon the smaller platform, each would take his place while his case was being heard. Zat Arras himself sat in the golden chair of the presiding magistrate. As we were seated and our guards retired to the foot of the stairway leading to the platform, he arose and called my name. "John Carter," he cried, "take your place upon the pedestal of truth to be judged impartially according to your acts, and here to know the reward you have earned thereby." Then turning to and fro toward the audience, he narrated the acts upon the value of which my reward was to be determined. "Know you, O judges and people of Helium," he said, "that John Carter, one-time Prince of Helium, has returned by his own statement from the Valley Door, and even from the Temple of Isis itself, that in the presence of many men of Helium he has blasphemed against the sacred Is, and against the Valley Door, and the lost sea of Chorus, and the holy Therns themselves, and even against Isis, goddess of death and of life eternal. And know you further by witness of thine own eyes that see him here now upon the pedestal of truth, that he has indeed returned from these sacred precincts in the face of our ancient customs, and in violation of the sanctity of our ancient religion. He who be once dead may not live again. He who attempts it must be made dead forever. Judges, your duty lies plain before you. Here can be no testimony in contravention of truth. What reward shall be meted to John Carter in accordance with the acts he has committed?" "Death," shouted one of the judges. And then a man sprang to his feet in the audience, and raising his hand on high, cried, "Justice! Justice! Justice!" It was Kantos Kan, and as all eyes turned toward him, he leaped past the Zodangan soldiery and sprang upon the platform. "What manner of justice be this?" he cried to Zat Arras. "The defendant has not been heard, nor has he had an opportunity to call others in his behalf. In the name of the people of Helium, I demand fair and impartial treatment for the Prince of Helium." A great cry arose from the audience then, "Justice! Justice! Justice!" and Zat Arras dared not deny them. "Speak then," he snarled, turning to me, "but blaspheme not against the things that are sacred upon Barsoom." "Men of Helium," I cried, turning to the spectators, and speaking over the heads of my judges, "how can John Carter expect justice from the men of Zodanga? He cannot, nor does he ask it. It is to the men of Helium that he states his case, nor does he appeal for mercy to any. It is not in his own cause that he speaks now, it is in thine, in the cause of your wives and daughters, and of wives and daughters yet unborn. It is to save them from the unthinkably atrocious indignities that I have seen heaped upon the fair women of Barsoom in the place men call the Temple of Isis. It is to save them from the sucking embrace of the plant men, from the fangs of the great white apes of Dor, from the cruel lust of the holy Therns, from all that the cold, dead Is carries them to, from homes of love and life and happiness. Sits there no man here who does not know the history of John Carter, how he came among you from another world and rose from a prisoner among the green men, through torture and persecution, to a place high among the highest of Barsoom. Nor ever did you know John Carter to lie in his own behalf, or to say aught that might harm the people of Barsoom, or to speak lightly of the strange religion which he respected without understanding. There be no man here, or elsewhere upon Barsoom today who does not owe his life directly to a single act of mine, in which I sacrificed myself and the happiness of my princess that you might live. And so, men of Helium, I think that I have the right to demand that I be heard, that I be believed, and that you let me serve you and save you from the false hereafter of Dornis's, as I saved you from the real death that other day. It is to you of Helium that I speak now. When I am done, let the men of Zodanga have their will with me. Zat Aras has taken my sword from me, so the men of Zodanga no longer fear me. Will you listen? Speak, John Carter, Prince of Helium, cried a great noble from the audience, and the multitude echoed his permission, until the building rocked with the noise of their demonstration. Zat Aras knew better than to interfere with such a sentiment, as was expressed that day in the Temple of Reward, and so for 2 hours I talked with the people of Helium. But when I had finished, Zat Aras arose and, turning to the judges, said in a low tone, "My nobles, you have heard John Carter's plea. Every opportunity has been given him to prove his innocence if he be not guilty, but instead he has but utilized the time in further blasphemy. What, gentlemen, is your verdict?" "Death to the blasphemer," cried one, springing to his feet, and in an instant the entire 31 judges were on their feet with upraised swords in token of unanimity of their verdict. If the people did not hear Zat Aras' charge, they certainly did hear the verdict of the tribunal. A sullen murmur rose louder and louder about the packed Colosseum, and then Kantos Kan, who had not left the platform since first he had taken his place near me, raised his hand for silence. When he could be heard, he spoke to the people in a cool and level voice. "You have heard the fate that the men of Zodanga would meet to Helium's noblest hero. It may be the duty of the men of Helium to accept the verdict as final. Let each man act according to his own heart. Here is the answer of Kantos Kan, head of the Navy of Helium, to Zat Aras and his judges," and with that he unbuckled his scabbard and threw his sword at my feet. In an instant, soldiers and citizens, officers and nobles were crowding past the soldiers of Zodanga and forcing their way to the throne of righteousness. 100 men surged up on the platform, and 100 blades rattled and clanked to the floor at my feet. Zat Aras and his officers were furious, but they were helpless. One by one I raised the swords to my lips and buckled them again upon their owners. "Come," said Kantos Kan, "we will escort John Carter and his party to his own palace." And they formed about us and started toward the stairs leading to the Isle of Hope. "Stop!" cried Zat Aras. "Soldiers of Helium, let no prisoner leave the throne of righteousness." The soldiery from Zodanga were the only organized body of Heliumetic troops within the temple, so Zat Aras was confident that his orders would be obeyed, but I do not think that he looked for the opposition that was raised the moment the soldiers advanced toward the throne. From every quarter of the Colosseum swords flashed and men rushed threateningly upon the Zodangans. Someone raised a cry. "Tardos Mors is dead 1,000 years to John Carter, Jeddak of Helium." As I heard that and saw the ugly attitude of the men of Helium toward the soldiers of Zat Aras, I knew that only a miracle could avert a clash that would end in civil war. "Hold!" I cried, leaping to the pedestal of truth once more. "Let no man move till I am done. A single sword thrust here today may plunge Helium into a bitter and bloody war, the results of which none can foresee. It will turn brother against brother and father against son. No man's life is worth that sacrifice. Rather would I submit to the biased judgment of Zat Aras than be the cause of civil strife in Helium. Let us each give in a point to the other, and let this entire matter rest until Tardos Mors returns or Mors Kajak, his son. If neither be back at the end of a year, a second trial may be held. The thing has a precedent." And then turning to Zat Aras, I said in a low voice, "Unless you be a bigger fool than I take you to be, you will grasp the chance I am offering you ere it is too late. Once that multitude of swords below is drawn against your soldiery, no man upon Barsoom, not even Tardos Mors himself, can avert the consequences. What say you? Speak quickly." The Jed of Zodang and Helium raised his voice to the angry sea beneath us. "Stay your hands, men of Helium," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "The sentence of the court is passed, but the day of retribution has not been set. I, Zat Aras, Jed of Zodanga, appreciating the royal connections of the prisoner and his past services to Helium and Barsoom, grant a respite of 1 year, or until the return of Mors Kajak, or Tardos Mors to Helium. Disperse quietly to your houses. Go." No one moved. Instead, they stood in tense silence with their eyes fastened upon me, as though waiting for a signal to attack. "Clear the temple," commanded Zat Aras in a low tone to one of his officers. Fearing the result of an attempt to carry out this order by force, I stepped to the edge of the platform and, pointing toward the main entrance, bid them pass out. As one man they turned at my request and filed, silent and threatening, past the soldiers of Zat Aras, Jed of Zodanga, who stood scowling in impotent rage. Cantus Can with the others who had sworn allegiance to me still stood upon the throne of righteousness with me. "Come," said Cantus Can to me, "we will escort you to your palace, my prince. Come, Carthoris and Shodar. Come, Tars Tarkas." And with a haughty sneer for Zat-Araz upon his handsome lips, he turned and strode to the throne steps and up the Isle of Hope. We 4 and the 100 loyal ones followed behind him, nor was a hand raised to stay us, though glowering eyes followed our triumphal march through the temple. In the avenues we found a press of people, but they opened a pathway for us, and many were the swords that were flung at my feet as I passed through the city of Helium toward my palace upon the outskirts. Here my old slaves fell upon their knees and kissed my hands as I greeted them. They cared not where I had been. It was enough that I had returned to them. "Ah, master," cried one, "if our divine princess were but here, this would be a day indeed." Tears came to my eyes, so that I was forced to turn away that I might hide my emotions. Carthoris wept openly as the slaves pressed about him with expressions of affection and words of sorrow for our common loss. It was now that Tars Tarkas for the first time learned that his daughter Sola had accompanied Dejah Thoris upon the last long pilgrimage. I had not had the heart to tell him what Cantus Can had told me. With the stoicism of the Green Martian, he showed no sign of suffering. Yet I knew that his grief was as poignant as my own. In marked contrast to his kind, he had in well-developed form the kindlier human characteristics of love, friendship, and charity. It was a sad and somber party that sat at the feast of welcome in the great dining hall of the palace of the Prince of Helium that day. We were over 100 strong, not counting the members of my little court, for Dejah Thoris and I had maintained a household consistent with our royal rank. The board, according to Red Martian custom, was triangular, for there were 3 in our family. Carthoris and I presided in the center of our sides of the table. Midway of the third side, Dejah Thoris, high-backed, carven chair stood vacant except for her gorgeous wedding trappings and jewels which were draped upon it. Behind stood a slave, as in the days when his mistress had occupied her place at the board, ready to do her bidding. It was the way upon Barsoom, so I endured the anguish of it, though it wrung my heart to see that silent chair where should have been my laughing and vivacious princess, keeping the great hall ringing with her merry gaiety. At my right sat Cantus Can, while to the right of Dejah Thoris' empty place Tars Tarkas sat in a huge chair before a raised section of the board which years ago I had had constructed to meet the requirements of his mighty bulk. The place of honor at a Martian board is always at the hostess's right, and this place was ever reserved by Dejah Thoris for the great Dark upon the occasions that he was in Helium. Horvastus sat in the seat of honor upon Carthoris' side of the table. There was little general conversation. It was a quiet and saddened party. The loss of Dejah Thoris was still fresh in the minds of all, and to this was added fear for the safety of Tardos Mors and Mors Kajak, as well as doubt and uncertainty as to the fate of Helium, should it prove true that she was permanently deprived of her great Jedak. Suddenly our attention was attracted by the sound of distant shouting, as of many people raising their voices at once, but whether in anger or rejoicing, we could not tell. Nearer and nearer came the tumult. A slave rushed into the dining hall to cry that a great concourse of people was swarming through the palace gates. A second burst upon the heels of the first, alternately laughing and shrieking as a madman. "Dejah Thoris is found," he cried. "A messenger from Dejah Thoris." I waited to hear no more. The great windows of the dining hall overlooked the avenue leading to the main gates. They were upon the opposite side of the hall from me, with the table intervening. I did not waste time encircling the great board. With a single leap I cleared table and diners and sprang upon the balcony beyond. 30 feet below lay the scarlet sward of the lawn, and beyond were many people crowding about a great thoat which bore a rider headed toward the palace. I vaulted to the ground below and ran swiftly toward the advancing party. As I came near to them, I saw that the figure on the thoat was Sola. "Where is the Princess of Helium?" I cried. The green girl slid from her mighty mount and ran toward me. "Oh, my prince, she cried. "She is gone forever. Even now she may be a captive upon the lesser moon. The black pirates of Barsoom have stolen her." Chapter 18. Sola's story. Once within the palace, I drew Sola to the dining hall, and when she had greeted her father after the formal manner of the green men, she told the story of the pilgrimage and capture of Dejah Thoris. 7 days ago, after her audience with Zat-Araz, Dejah Thoris attempted to slip from the palace in the dead of night. Although I had not heard the outcome of her interview with Zat-Araz, I knew that something had occurred then to cause her the keenest mental agony, and when I discovered her creeping from the palace, I did not need to be told her destination. Hastily arousing a dozen of her most faithful guards, I explained my fears to them, and as one they enlisted with me to follow our beloved princess in her wanderings, even to the sacred Is and the valley door. We came upon her but a short distance from the palace. With her was faithful Wula the hound, but none other. When we overtook her, she feigned anger and ordered us back to the palace. But for once we disobeyed her, and when she found that we would not let her go upon the last long pilgrimage alone, she wept and embraced us, and together we went out into the night toward the south. The following day we came upon a herd of small thoats, and thereafter we were mounted and made good time. We traveled very fast and very far due south until the morning of the 5th day we sighted a great fleet of battleships sailing north. They saw us before we could seek shelter, and soon we were surrounded by a horde of black men. The princess's guard fought nobly to the end, but they were soon overcome and slain. Only Diathoris and I were spared. When she realized that she was in the clutches of the black pirates, she attempted to take her own life, but one of the blacks tore her dagger from her, and then they bound us both, so that we could not use our hands. The fleet continued north after capturing us. There were about 20 large battleships in all, besides a number of small swift cruisers. That evening one of the smaller cruisers that had been far in advance of the fleet returned with a prisoner, a young red woman, whom they had picked up in a range of hills under the very noses, they said, of a fleet of 3 red Martian battleships. From scraps of conversation which we overheard, it was evident that the black pirates were searching for a party of fugitives that had escaped them several days prior. That they considered the capture of the young woman important was evident from the long and earnest interview the commander of the fleet held with her when she was brought to him. Later she was bound and placed in the compartment with Diathoris and myself. The new captive was a very beautiful girl. She told Diathoris that many years ago she had taken the voluntary pilgrimage from the court of her father, the Jeddak of Parth. She was Thuvia, the princess of Parth. And then she asked Diathoris who she might be. And when she heard, she fell upon her knees and kissed Diathoris' fettered hands, and told her that that very morning she had been with John Carter, Prince of Helium, and Carthoris, her son. Diathoris could not believe her at first, but finally when the girl had narrated all the strange adventures that had befallen her, since she had met John Carter, and told her of the things John Carter, and Carthoris, and Shodar had narrated of their adventures in the land of the firstborn, Diathoris knew that it could be none other than the Prince of Helium. For who, she said, upon all Barsoom other than John Carter could have done the deeds you tell of? And when Thuvia told Diathoris of her love for John Carter, and his loyalty and devotion to the princess of his choice, Diathoris broke down and wept, cursing Zadaras and the cruel fate that had driven her from Helium, but a few brief days before the return of her beloved lord. I do not blame you for loving him, Thuvia, she said, and that your affection for him is pure and sincere. I can well believe from the candor of your avowal of it to me. The fleet continued north nearly to Helium, but last night they evidently realized that John Carter had indeed escaped them, and so they turned toward the south once more. Shortly thereafter a guard entered our compartment and dragged me to the deck. There is no place in the land of the firstborn for a green one, he said, and with that he gave me a terrific shove that carried me toppling from the deck of the battleship. Evidently this seemed to him the easiest way of ridding the vessel of my presence and killing me at the same time. But a kind fate intervened, and by a miracle I escaped with but slight bruises. The ship was moving slowly at the time, and as I lunged overboard into the darkness beneath, I shuddered at the awful plunge I thought awaited me. For all day the fleet had sailed thousands of feet above the ground, but to my utter surprise I struck upon a soft mass of vegetation not 20 feet from the deck of the ship. In fact, the keel of the vessel must have been grazing the surface of the ground at the time. I lay all night where I had fallen, and the next morning brought an explanation of the fortunate coincidence that had saved me from a terrible death. As the sun rose, I saw a vast panorama of sea bottom and distant hills lying far below me. I was upon the highest peak of a lofty range. The fleet in the darkness of the preceding night had barely grazed the crest of the hills, and in the brief span that they hovered close to the surface, the black guard had pitched me, as he supposed, to my death. A few miles west of me was a great waterway. When I reached it, I found to my delight that it belonged to Helium. Here Thoth was procured for me, the rest you know. For many minutes none spoke. Diathoris in the clutches of the firstborn. I shuddered at the thought, but of a sudden the old fire of unconquerable self-confidence surged through me. I sprang to my feet, and with back-thrown shoulders and upraised sword took a solemn vow to reach, rescue, and revenge my princess. 100 swords leapt from 100 scabbards, and 100 fighting men sprang to the tabletop and pledged me their lives and fortunes to the expedition. Already my plans were formulated. I thanked each loyal friend, and leaving Carthoris to entertain them, withdrew to my own audience chamber with Cantos Can, Tars Tarkas, Sodar, and Horvastus. Here we discussed the details of our expedition until long after dark. Sodar was positive that Isis would choose both Dejah and Thuvia to serve her for a year. For that length of time, at least they will be comparatively safe, he said, and we will at least know where to look for them. In the matter of equipping a fleet to enter Omin, the details were left to Kantos Khan and Shodar. The former agreed to take such vessels as we required into dock as rapidly as possible, where Shodar would direct their equipment with water propellers. For many years, the Black had been in charge of the refitting of captured battleships that they might navigate Omin, and so was familiar with the construction of the propellers, housings, and the auxiliary gearing required. It was estimated that it would require 6 months to complete our preparations in view of the fact that the utmost secrecy must be maintained to keep the project from the ears of Zat Aras. Kantos Khan was confident now that the man's ambitions were fully aroused and that nothing short of the title of Jeddak of Helium would satisfy him. I doubt, he said, if you would even welcome Dejah return, for it would mean another nearer the throne than he. With you and Karthoris out of the way, there would be little to prevent him from assuming the title of Jeddak. And you may rest assured that so long as he is supreme here, there is no safety for either of you. There is a way, cried Horvastus, to thwart him effectually and forever. What? I asked. He smiled. I shall whisper it here, but someday I shall stand upon the dome of the Temple of Reward and shout it to cheering multitudes below. What do you mean? Asked Kantos Khan. John Carter, Jeddak of Helium, said Horvastus in a low voice. The eyes of my companions lighted, and grim smiles of pleasure and anticipation overspread their faces, as each eye turned toward me questioningly. But I shook my head. No, my friends, I said, smiling, I thank you, but it cannot be. Not yet, at least. When we know that Tardos Mors and Mors Kajak are gone to return no more, if I be here, then I shall join you all to see that the people of Helium are permitted to choose fairly their next Jeddak. Whom they choose may count upon the loyalty of my sword, nor shall I seek the honor for myself. Until then, Tardos Mors is Jeddak of Helium, and Zat Aras is his representative. As you will, John Carter, said Horvastus. But what was that? He whispered, pointing toward the window overlooking the gardens. The words were scarce out of his mouth ere he had sprung to the balcony without. There he goes, he cried excitedly. The guards, below there. The guards. We were close behind him, and all saw the figure of a man run quickly across a little piece of sward and disappear in the shrubbery beyond. He was on the balcony when I first saw him, cried Horvastus. Quick, let us follow him. Together we ran to the gardens, but even though we scoured the grounds with the entire guard for hours, no trace could we find of the night marauder. What do you make of it, Kantos Khan? Asked Tars Tarkas. A spy sent by Zat Aras, he replied. It was ever his way. He will have something interesting to report to his master then, laughed Horvastus. I hope he heard only our references to a new Jeddak, I said. If he overheard our plans to rescue Dejah, it will mean civil war, for he will attempt to thwart us, and in that I will not be thwarted. There would I turn against Tardos Mors himself, were it necessary. If it throws all Helium into a bloody conflict, I shall go on with these plans to save my princess. Nothing shall stay me now short of death. And should I die, my friends, will you take oath to prosecute the search for her and bring her back in safety to her grandfather's court? Upon the hilt of his sword, each of them swore to do as I had asked. It was agreed that the battleships that were to be remodeled should be ordered to Hastur, another Heliometic city, far to the southwest. Kantos Khan thought that the docks there, in addition to their regular work, would accommodate at least 6 battleships at a time. As he was commander-in-chief of the Navy, it would be a simple matter for him to order the vessels there as they could be handled, and thereafter keep the remodeled fleet in remote parts of the empire, until we should be ready to assemble it for the dash upon Omin. It was late that night before our conference broke up, but each man there had his particular duties outlined, and the details of the entire plan had been mapped out. Kantos Khan and Shodar were to attend to the remodeling of the ships. Tars Tarkas was to get into communication with Thark and learn the sentiments of his people toward his return from Dor. If favorable, he was to repair immediately to Thark and devote his time to the assembling of a great horde of green warriors whom it was our plan to send in transports directly to the Valley Dor and the Temple of Isis, while the fleet entered Omin and destroyed the vessels of the firstborn. Upon Horvastus devolved the delicate mission of organizing a secret force of fighting men sworn to follow John Carter wherever he might lead. As we estimated that it would require over 1 million men to man the 1,000 great battleships we intended to use on Omin, and the transports for the green men as well as the ships that were to convoy the transports, it was no trifling job that Horvastus had before him. After they had left, I bid Karthors good night, for I was very tired, and going to my own apartments, bathed, and lay down upon my sleeping silks and furs. For the first good night's sleep I had had an opportunity to look forward to since I had returned to Barsoom. But even now I was to be disappointed. How long I slept I do not know. When I awoke suddenly, it was to find a half-dozen powerful men upon me, a gag already in my mouth, and a moment later my arms and legs securely bound. So quickly had they worked, and to such good purpose, that I was utterly beyond the power to resist them by the time I was fully awake. Never a word spoke they, and the gag effectually prevented me speaking. Silent they lifted me and bore me toward the door of my chamber. As they passed the window through which the farther moon was casting its brilliant beams, I saw that each of the party had his face swathed in layers of silk. I could not recognize one of them. When they had come into the corridor with me, they turned toward a secret panel in the wall which led to the passage that terminated in the pits beneath the palace. That any knew of this panel outside my own household I was doubtful. Yet the leader of the band did not hesitate a moment. He stepped directly to the panel, touched the concealed button, and as the door swung open he stood aside while his companions entered with me. Then he closed the panel behind him and followed us. Down through the passageways to the pits we went. The leader rapped upon it with the hilt of his sword 3 quick, sharp blows, a pause, then 3 more, another pause, and then 2. A second later the wall swung in and I was pushed within a brilliantly lighted chamber in which sat 3 richly trapped men. One of them turned toward me with a sardonic smile upon his thin, cruel lips. It was Zat-Aras. Chapter 19. Black Despair. Ah, said Zat-Aras, to what kindly circumstance am I indebted for the pleasure of this unexpected visit from the Prince of Helium? While he was speaking, one of my guards had removed the gag from my mouth, but I made no reply to Zat-Aras, simply standing there in silence with level gaze fixed upon the jet of Zodanga, and I doubt not that my expression was colored by the contempt I felt for the man. The eyes of those within the chamber were fixed first upon me and then upon Zat-Aras, until finally a flush of anger crept slowly over his face. You may go, he said to those who had brought me, and when only his 2 companions and ourselves were left in the chamber, he spoke to me again, in a voice of ice, very slowly and deliberately, with many pauses, as though he would choose his words cautiously. John Carter, he said, by the edict of custom, by the law of our religion, and by the verdict of an impartial court, you are condemned to die. The people cannot save you, I alone may accomplish that. You are absolutely in my power to do with as I wish. I may kill you, or I may free you, and should I elect to kill you, none would be the wiser. Should you go free in Helium for a year, in accordance with the conditions of your reprieve, there is little fear that the people would ever insist upon the execution of the sentence imposed upon you. You may go free within 2 minutes upon one condition. Tardos Mors will never return to Helium. Neither will Mors Kajak nor Dejathoris. Helium must select a new Jedak within the year. Zat-Aras would be Jedak of Helium. Say that you will espouse my cause. This is the price of your freedom. I am done. I knew it was within the scope of Zat-Aras' cruel heart to destroy me, and if I were dead I could see little reason to doubt that he might easily become Jedak of Helium. Free, I could prosecute the search for Dejathoris. Were I dead, my brave comrades might not be able to carry out our plans. So by refusing to accede to his request, it was quite probable that not only would I not prevent him from becoming Jedak of Helium, but that I would be the means of sealing Dejathoris' fate of consigning her, through my refusal, to the horrors of the arena of Issus. For a moment I was perplexed, but for a moment only. The proud daughter of 1,000 Jedaks would choose death to a dishonorable alliance such as this, nor could John Carter do less for Helium than his princess would do. Then I turned to Zat-Aras. There can be no alliance, I said, between a traitor to Helium and a prince of the house of Tardos Mors. I do not believe, Zat-Aras, that the great Jedak is dead. Zat-Aras shrugged his shoulders. It will not be long, John Carter, he said, that your opinions will be of interest even to yourself, so make the best of them while you can. Zat-Aras will permit you in due time to reflect further upon the magnanimous offer he has made you. Into the silence and darkness of the pits you will enter upon your reflection this night, with the knowledge that should you fail within a reasonable time to agree to the alternative which has been offered you, never shall you emerge from the darkness and the silence again, nor shall you know at what minute the hand will reach out through the darkness and the silence with the keen dagger that shall rob you of your last chance to win again the warmth and the freedom and joyousness of the outer world. Zat-Aras clapped his hands as he ceased speaking. The guards returned. Zat-Aras waved his hand in my direction. To the pits, he said, that was all. 4 men accompanied me from the chamber, and with a radium hand light to illumine the way, escorted me through seemingly interminable tunnels, down, ever down beneath the city of Helium. At length they halted within a fair-sized chamber. There were rings set in the rocky walls. To them chains were fastened, and at the ends of many of the chains were human skeletons. One of these they kicked aside, and, unlocking the huge padlock that had held a chain about what had once been a human ankle, they snapped the iron band about my own leg. Then they left me, taking the light with them. Utter darkness prevailed. For a few minutes I could hear the clanking of accoutrements, but even this grew fainter and fainter, until at last the silence was as complete as the darkness. I was alone with my gruesome companions, with the bones of dead men whose fate was likely but the index of my own. How long I stood listening in the darkness I do not know, but the silence was unbroken, and at last I sunk to the hard floor of my prison, where, leaning my head against the stony wall, I slept. It must have been several hours later that I awakened to find a young man standing before me. In one hand he bore a light, in the other a receptacle containing a gruel-like mixture, the common prison fare of Barsoom. "Zat-Aras sends you greetings," said the young man, "and commands me to inform you that though he is fully advised of the plot to make you Jeddak of Helium, he is, however, not inclined to withdraw the offer which he has made you. To gain your freedom you have but to request me to advise Zat-Aras that you accept the terms of his proposition." I but shook my head. The youth said no more, and after placing the food upon the floor at my side, returned up the corridor, taking the light with him. Twice a day for many days this youth came to my cell with food, and ever the same greetings from Zat-Aras. For a long time I tried to engage him in conversation upon other matters, but he would not talk, and so, at length, I desisted. For months I sought to devise methods to inform Carthoris of my whereabouts. For months I scraped and scraped upon a single link of the massive chain which held me, hoping eventually to wear it through, that I might follow the youth back through the winding tunnels to a point where I could make a break for liberty. I was beside myself with anxiety for knowledge of the progress of the expedition which was to rescue Dejathoris. I felt that Carthoris would not let the matter drop were he free to act, but in so far as I knew, he also might be a prisoner in Zat-Aras pits. That Zat-Aras spy had overheard our conversation relative to the selection of a new Jeddak I knew, and scarcely a half-dozen minutes prior we had discussed the details of the plan to rescue Dejathoris. The chances were that that matter, too, was well known to him. Carthoris, Cantus Can, Tars Tarkas, Horvastus, and Shodar might even now be the victims of Zat-Aras assassins or else his prisoners. I determined to make at least one more effort to learn something, and to this end I adopted strategy when next the youth came to my cell. I had noticed that he was a handsome fellow, about the size and age of Carthoris, and I had also noticed that his shabby trappings but illy comported with his dignified and noble bearing. It was with these observations as a basis that I opened my negotiations with him upon his next subsequent visit. "You have been very kind to me during my imprisonment here," I said to him, "and as I feel that I have at best but a very short time to live, I wish, ere it is too late, to furnish substantial testimony of my appreciation of all that you have done to render my imprisonment bearable. Promptly you have brought my food each day, seeing that it was pure and of sufficient quantity. Never by word or deed have you attempted to take advantage of my defenseless condition to insult or torture me. You have been uniformly courteous and considerate. It is this more than any other thing which prompts my feeling of gratitude and my desire to give you some slight token of it. In the guard room of my palace are many fine trappings. Go thou there and select the harness which most pleases you. It shall be yours. All I ask is that you wear it, that I may know that my wish has been realized. Tell me that you will do it." The boy's eyes had lighted with pleasure as I spoke, and I saw him glance from his rusty trappings to the magnificence of my own. For a moment he stood in thought before he spoke, and for that moment my heart fairly ceased beating, so much for me there was which hung upon the substance of his answer. And I went to the palace of the Prince of Helium with any such demand, they would laugh at me, and into the bargain would more than likely throw me head foremost into the avenue. No, it cannot be, though I thank you for the offer. Why, if Zat-Aras even dreamed that I contemplated such a thing, he would have my heart cut out of me. There can be no harm in it, my boy, I urged. By night you may go to my palace with a note from me to Carthoris, my son. You may read the note before you deliver it, that you may know that it contains nothing harmful to Zat-Aras. My son will be discreet, and so none but us three need know. It is very simple, and such a harmless act that it could be condemned by no one." Again he stood silently in deep thought. "And there is a jeweled short sword which I took from the body of a northern Jeddak. When you get the harness, see that Carthoris gives you that also. With it and the harness which you may select, there will be no more handsomely accoutred warrior in all Zodanga. Bring writing materials when you come next to my cell, and within a few hours we shall see you garbed in a style befitting your birth and carriage." Still in thought, and without speaking, he turned and left me. I could not guess what his decision might be, and for hours I sat fretting over the outcome of the matter. If he accepted a message to Carthoris, it would mean to me that Carthoris still lived and was free. If the youth returned wearing the harness and the sword, I would know that Carthoris had received my note, and that he knew that I still lived. That the bearer of the note was a Zodangan would be sufficient to explain to Carthoris that I was a prisoner of Zataraz. It was with feelings of excited expectancy which I could scarce hide that I heard the youth's approach upon the occasion of his next regular visit. I did not speak beyond my accustomed greeting of him. As he placed the food upon the floor by my side, he also deposited writing materials at the same time. My heart fairly bounded for joy. I had won my point. For a moment I looked at the materials in feigned surprise, but soon I permitted an expression of dawning comprehension to come into my face, and then picking them up, I penned a brief order to Carthoris to deliver to Parthak a harness of his selection, and the short sword which I described. That was all. But it meant everything to me and to Carthoris. I laid the note open upon the floor. Parthak picked it up, and without a word, left me. As nearly as I could estimate, I had at this time been in the pits for 300 days. If anything was to be done to save Dejathoris, it must be done quickly, for, were she not already dead, her end must soon come, since those whom Isis chose lived but a single year. The next time I heard approaching footsteps, I could scarce await to see if Parthak wore the harness and the sword, but judge, if you can, my chagrin and disappointment, when I saw that he who bore my food was not Parthak. "What has become of Parthak?" I asked, but the fellow would not answer, and as soon as he had deposited my food, turned and retraced his steps to the world above. Days came and went, and still my new jailer continued his duties, nor would he ever speak a word to me, either in reply to the simplest question, or of his own initiative. I could only speculate on the cause of Parthak's removal, but that it was connected in some way directly with the note I had given him was most apparent to me. After all my rejoicing, I was no better off than before, for now I did not even know that Carthoris lived. For if Parthak had wished to raise himself in the estimation of Zat-Aras, he would have permitted me to go on precisely as I did, so that he could carry my note to his master, in proof of his own loyalty and devotion. 30 days had passed since I had given the youth the note. 330 days had passed since my incarceration. As closely as I could figure, there remained a bare 30 days ere Dejathoris would be ordered to the arena for the rites of Isis. As the terrible picture forced itself vividly across my imagination, I buried my face in my arms, and only with the greatest difficulty was it that I repressed the tears that welled to my eyes despite my every effort. To think of that beautiful creature torn and rended by the cruel fangs of the hideous white apes. It was unthinkable. Such a horrid fact could not be, and yet my reason told me that within 30 days my incomparable princess would be fought over in the arena of the firstborn by those very wild beasts, that her bleeding corpse would be dragged through the dirt and the dust, until at last a part of it would be rescued to be served as food upon the tables of the black nobles. I think that I should have gone crazy but for the sound of my approaching jailer. It distracted my attention from the terrible thoughts that had been occupying my entire mind. Now a new and grim determination came to me. I would make one superhuman effort to escape, kill my jailer by a ruse, and trust to fate to lead me to the outer world in safety. With the thought came instant action. I threw myself upon the floor of my cell close by the wall, in a strained and distorted posture, as though I were dead after a struggle or convulsions. When he should stoop over me, I had but to grasp his throat with one hand and strike him a terrific blow with the slack of my chain, which I gripped firmly in my right hand for the purpose. Nearer and nearer came the doomed man. Now I heard him halt before me. There was a muttered exclamation, and then a step as he came to my side. I felt him kneel beside me. My grip tightened upon the chain. He leaned close to me. I must open my eyes to find his throat, grasp it, and strike one mighty final blow all at the same instant. The thing worked just as I had planned. So brief was the interval between the opening of my eyes and the fall of the chain that I could not check it, though in that minute interval I recognized the face so close to mine as that of my son Carthoris. God, what cruel and malign fate had worked to such a frightful end? What devious chain of circumstances had led my boy to my side at this one particular minute of our lives when I could strike him down and kill him, in ignorance of his identity? A benign though tardy providence blurred my vision and my mind as I sank into unconsciousness across the lifeless body of my only son. When I regained consciousness, it was to feel a cool, firm hand pressed upon my forehead. For an instant I did not open my eyes. I was endeavoring to gather the loose ends of many thoughts and memories which flitted elusively through my tired and overwrought brain. At length came the cruel recollection of the thing that I had done in my last conscious act, and then I dared not to open my eyes for fear of what I should see lying beside me. I wondered who it could be who ministered to me. Carthoris must have had a companion whom I had not seen. Well, I must face the inevitable sometime, so why not now? And with a sigh I opened my eyes. Leaning over me was Carthoris, a great bruise upon his forehead where the chain had struck, but alive, thank God, alive. There was no one with him. Reaching out my arms, I took my boy within them, and if ever there arose from any planet a fervent prayer of gratitude, it was there beneath the crust of dying Mars as I thanked the eternal mystery for my son's life. The brief instant in which I had seen and recognized Carthoris before the chain fell must have been ample to check the force of the blow. He told me that he had lain unconscious for a time, how long he did not know. "How came you here at all?" I asked, mystified that he had found me without a guide. "It was by your wit in apprising me of your existence and imprisonment through the youth Parthak, until he came for his harness and his sword. We had thought you dead. When I had read your note, I did as you had bid, giving Parthak his choice of the harnesses in the guard-room, and later bringing the jeweled short sword to him. But the minute that I had fulfilled the promise you evidently had made him, my obligation to him ceased. Then I commenced to question him, but he would give me no information as to your whereabouts. He was intensely loyal to Zadaras. Finally, I gave him a fair choice between freedom and the pits beneath the palace, the price of freedom to be full information as to where you were imprisoned and directions which would lead us to you. But still he maintained his stubborn partisanship. Despairing, I had him removed to the pits, where he still is. No threats of torture or death, no bribes, however fabulous, would move him. His only reply to all our importunities was that whenever Parthak died, were it tomorrow or 1,000 years hence, no man could truly say, a traitor is gone to his deserts. Finally, Shodar, who is a fiend for subtle craftiness, evolved a plan whereby we might worm the information from him. And so I caused Horvastus to be harnessed in the metal of a Zodangan soldier and chained in Parthak's cell beside him. For 15 days the noble Horvastus has languished in the darkness of the pits, but not in vain. Little by little he won the confidence and friendship of the Zodangan, until only today Parthak, thinking that he was speaking not only to a countryman, but to a dear friend, revealed to Horvastus the exact cell in which you lay. It took me but a short time to locate the plans of the pits of helium among the official papers. To come to you, though, was a trifle more difficult matter. As you know, while all the pits beneath the city are connected, there are but single entrances from those beneath each section and its neighbor, and that at the upper level just underneath the ground. Of course, these openings which lead from contiguous pits to those beneath government buildings are always guarded. And so, while I easily came to the entrance to the pits beneath the palace which Zadaras is occupying, I found there a Zodangan soldier on guard. There I left him when I had gone by, but his soul was no longer with him. And here I am, just in time to be nearly killed by you, he ended, laughing. As he talked, Carthoris had been working at the lock which held my fetters, and now, with an exclamation of pleasure, he dropped the end of the chain to the floor, and I stood up once more, freed from the galling irons I had chafed in for almost a year. He had brought a long sword and a dagger for me, and thus armed we set out upon the return journey to my palace. At the point where we left the pits of Zadaras, we found the body of the guard Carthoris had slain. It had not yet been discovered, and in order to still further delay search and mystify the Jed's people, we carried the body with us for a short distance, hiding it in a tiny cell off the main corridor of the pits, beneath an adjoining estate. Some half-hour later we came to the pits beneath our own palace, and soon thereafter emerged into the audience chamber itself, where we found Kantos Khan, Tars Tarkas Horvastus, and Shodar awaiting us most impatiently. No time was lost in fruitless recounting of my imprisonment. What I desired to know was how well the plans we had laid nearly a year ago had been carried out. "It has taken much longer than we had expected," replied Kantos Khan. "The fact that we were compelled to maintain utter secrecy has handicapped us terribly. Zadaras spies are everywhere. Yet, to the best of my knowledge, no word of our real plans has reached the villain's ear. Tonight there lies about the great docks at Hastur a fleet of 1,000 of the mightiest battleships that ever sailed above Barsoom, and each equipped to navigate the air of Omian and the waters of Omian itself. Upon each battleship there are 5 10-man cruisers, and 10 5-man scouts, and 100 1-man scouts, In all, 116,000 craft fitted with both air and water propellers. At Thark lie the transports for the Green Warriors of Tars Tarkas, 900 large troop ships, and with them their convoys. 7 days ago all was in readiness. But we waited in the hope that by so doing your rescue might be encompassed in time for you to command the expedition. It is well we waited, my prince. How is it, Tars Tarkas, I asked, that the men of Thark take not the accustomed action against one who returns from the bosom of ice? They sent a council of 50 chieftains to talk with me here, replied the Thark. We are a just people, and when I had told them the entire story, they were as one man in agreeing that their action toward me would be guided by the action of Helium toward John Carter. In the meantime, at their request, I was to resume my throne as Jeddak of Thark, that I might negotiate with neighboring hordes for warriors to compose the land forces of the expedition. I have done that which I agreed. 250,000 fighting men, gathered from the ice cap at the north to the ice cap at the south, and representing 1,000 different communities, from 100 wild and warlike hordes, fill the great city of Thark tonight. They are ready to sail for the land of the firstborn when I give the word and fight there until I bid them stop. All they ask is the loot they take in transportation to their own territories when the fighting and the looting are over. I am done. And thou, Horvastus, I asked, what has been thy success? 1,000,000 veteran fighting men from Helium's thin waterways man the battleships, the transports, and the convoys, he replied. Each is sworn to loyalty and secrecy, nor were enough recruited from a single district to cause suspicion. Good, I cried. Each has done his duty, and now, Kantos can, may we not repair at once to Hastur and get underway before tomorrow's sun? We should lose no time, Prince, replied Kantos Khan. Already the people of Hastur are questioning the purpose of so great a fleet fully manned with fighting men. I wonder much that word of it has not before reached Zat Araz. A cruiser awaits above at your own dock. Let us leave it a fusillade of shots from the palace gardens just without cut short his further words. Together we rushed to the balcony in time to see a dozen members of my palace guard disappear in the shadows of some distant shrubbery, as in pursuit of one who fled. Directly beneath us upon the scarlet sward a handful of guardsmen were stooping above a still and prostrate form. While we watched, they lifted the figure in their arms and at my command bore it to the audience chamber where we had been in council. When they stretched the body at our feet, we saw that it was that of a red man in the prime of life. His metal was plain, such as common soldiers wear, or those who wish to conceal their identity. Another of Zatarara's spies, said Horvastus. So it would seem, I replied, and then to the guard you may remove the body. Wait, said Shodar. If you will, Prince, ask that a cloth and a little thode oil be brought. I nodded to one of the soldiers, who left the chamber, returning presently with the things that Shodar had requested. The black kneeled beside the body and, dipping a corner of the cloth in the thode oil, rubbed for a moment on the dead face before him. Then he turned to me with a smile, pointing to his work. I looked and saw that where Shodar had applied the thode oil the face was white as mine, and then Shodar seized the black hair of the corpse, and with a sudden wrench tore it all away, revealing a hairless pate beneath. Guardsmen and nobles pressed close about the silent witness upon the marble floor. Many were the exclamations of astonishment and questioning wonder as Zodar's axe confirmed the suspicion which he had held. A Thurn, whispered Tars Tarkas. Worse than that, I fear, replied Shodar. But let us see. With that he drew his dagger and cut open a locked pouch which had dangled from the Thurn's harness, and from it he brought forth a circlet of gold set with a large gem. It was the mate to that which I had taken from Satyr Throg. He was a holy Thurn, said Shodar. Fortunate indeed it is for us that he did not escape. The officer of the guard entered the chamber at this juncture. My prince, he said, I have to report that this fellow's companion escaped us. I think that it was with the connivance of one or more of the men at the gate. I have ordered them all under arrest. Shodar handed him the thode oil and cloth. With this you may discover the spy among you, he said. I at once ordered a secret search within the city, for every Martian noble maintains a secret service of his own. A half-hour later the officer of the guard came again to report. This time it was to confirm our worst fears. Half the guards at the gate that night had been Thurns disguised as red men. Come, I cried. We must lose no time. On to Hastur at once. Should the Thurns attempt to check us at the southern verge of the ice cap, it may result in the wrecking of all our plans and the total destruction of the expedition. 10 minutes later we were speeding through the night toward Hastur, prepared to strike the first blow for the preservation of Dija Thoris. This concludes the 7th part of 8 total of the Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.